All right, so welcome everyone. Today I'm talking with Barbara from Remote, and we are talking about everything to do with scaling your company internationally. So I know at SeedLegals, we've got team in Ireland, we've got in France, we've got in APAC, and we've got all the questions that everyone else is asking as well. So we thought we'd talk to the experts to help us and help you on growing your business. So the common things that come up are, I need to hire someone in America. Should I hire them as an employee? Do I need to create a US subsidiary? What do I do with share options and more? So without further ado, let me hand over to Barbara. She's driving. I may pop in with some questions occasionally. And for those live in our webinar, please pop your questions in the web chat and we will get to them during or after we've covered the main set of things. So Barbara, over to you. Introduce yourself and take it away.
Great. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. My name is Barbara Matthews, Chief People Officer of Remote, based here in Dublin, but Remote has people in over 90 countries across the world. So we know a little bit about hiring outside of the main country that you're sitting in. So I'm going to go through a few things that you should be aware of, or things that you should be thinking of as a business as you're thinking about building your organization outside of, we're using the UK for this example. So as obviously, there are many challenges with building a global business, especially if you're not, a giant multinational. It's quite difficult to manage the risk, the complexity, and quite frankly, the logistics that come with hiring people all over the world. Even if you're just hiring in one other country or a small number of countries, you do still have the possibility to run into challenges and what it means to be compliant and all the things that are attached with that. So what I'm trying to do is just give you an overview about how to handle these types of challenges, how to think through whether your company is ready essentially to do this. And if you are really focused on doing it, what the implications should look like for you. Basically, the way I think about it is I would manage this thinking across a few different phases. The first one would be evaluation, and then how to manage it and implement. So starting with evaluation, you can see here, if you're thinking about the evaluation of the readiness of your company to create a remote or indeed a hybrid company with employees in multiple entities, it's important to think about the criteria for the remote hiring. So think really carefully about what roles and departments can actually function effectively remotely. Remote itself has been successful in scaling across 90 countries, like I said, and we have 1,300 employees and we still have no offices. So, we believe that anything can be remote, but for your organization in your country or in your company, you need to be very deliberate about how this will happen. But if you intend to keep an office and then you tend to hire remotely in other countries, what will the split be between roles that are in office and out of office? So thinking really carefully about that criteria and really mapping it out very deliberately before you start doing anything else. The second thing to think about is whether your company is ready. So thinking about how to assess a company's readiness for remote work, I would encourage you to think about things like the technology that you use, the communication channels that you use. What is your company culture like? What tooling and training do you have in your company? Or what do you need to build to make sure that you're ready? Checking also on if you have any documentation required around all of the different ways to be remote. So, for example, in remote, we are asynchronous by default. So thinking about whether you are in your own company. And then we think about are there any cultural barriers to be aware of as well. We have an employee handbook, and I talk about very deliberate documentation because in our employee handbook, we very deliberately document everything that is needed around ensuring a company is ready to go remote. And what's important here is that the employee handbook is actually open to anyone across the world. So you can all access it. You don't have to be part of remote. You don't even have to be a customer of ours. So the employee handbook has a lot of really helpful and deliberate and actionable, I think, tips and tricks for how you can figure out if your company is ready, and if it's not ready, how you can get ready to become remote and be able to hire people in different countries. And then the final area within kind of the evaluation phase is risk and compliance. Not the most exciting of topics, I know, But hiring outside of your home country can be very complicated. And if you get it wrong, can be very costly. The compliance is really key here. Remote has extensive experience in this area. And if you don't have a local entity in the country that you're hiring into, you'll need what's called an EOR, or an employer of record, to help you. If you do have an entity in that country, you may still need global payroll support or benefit support or tax expertise. And most likely you'll need a partner who can really help you understand the variety of situations that you may encounter as you hire into other countries from a risk and a compliance standpoint. So moving into phase 2 of how to think about whether you're ready is really about, excuse me, how you're going to manage the employee experience and how you're going to manage your company with people in all different locations. So for example, just thinking even just about a hybrid team, how you would manage this hybrid team. How do you make sure that your team members don't miss out on these water cooler conversations? How do you make sure that your leaders don't fall into like a proximity bias of allocating, you know, the person next to them, the big project, because that's the person they see all the time, versus thinking of others that are working remotely or in other locations. So making sure that as an organization that you're really focused on figuring out these challenges and how they would be managed within your company, and making sure that you're training your managers very deliberately on this area before it starts and before you start to manage those organizations.
All right, so that was fantastic, and that's a cue for me to hop in. So,
okay.
You know, so of course, hiring remotely is the solution to a set of problems. But one of the key things, you know, to me is who should be in the office and when they should be in the office, and so on. So I don't know if you've got slides that cover that, but let's dive in, and you can tell me if we should do that later. But let's dive in maybe with some data. So I think of it as maybe a few circles. The first circle is, you know, if I'm a UK company, do you have to live in London and be in the office every day? World is kind of over, right? So the next one is you need to live close enough so you could be in the office a day or two a week. And that's that sort of hybrid work. But then the next thing is, well, why am I paying UK rates when I may as well hire someone, if they're not going to be in the office anyway, hire elsewhere? But then what makes sense? So let me ask you, how many days a week in the office are you seeing for, you know, hybrid and remote? And let me give you an example at SeedLegals. So our CTO would desperately like the tech team to be in the office like a couple of days a week, and they desperately don't want to be in the office. So we managed to get the tech team in at the beginning of each sprint for like a day every 2 weeks. Our sales and support team, on the other hand, are very gregarious and will be in the office 2 or 3 days a week. And of course, we've got people who live abroad. We've got a team in France and elsewhere, and then they would come in and meet for, you know, special events and so on. So what are you seeing in terms of, you know, for people who are elsewhere and simply outside of, you know, wherever your HQ is? How often do they come in, and how do you see that differ across different parts of the org?
So we tend to see, I think if you're thinking about hybrid, you tend to see about 3 days in the office. Remote did research some job roles in the UK in 2022. Now, we hadn't fully moved into the kind of the call back to the office, I guess. But the top 3 roles that had the most remote opportunities at the time were in software development, so your idea around the tech space as well, and then customer support and marketing. So they're the ones that we were seeing the most freedom, I guess, for want of another word, of those people to work more remotely versus being in the office.
All right, cool. Okay, thank you. Back to you.
Sure. Okay, where was I? Okay, so hybrid team dynamics, yes. And then the second, another area to think about is the performance metrics. Sorry, I'd missed that. So personally, I don't care how long my team are sitting at their desk, as long as I'm seeing outputs and goals met. For me, it's really important to focus on impact over effort and time spent. And I think if you are moving into a world where you are working remotely, you're not able to look over people's shoulders. You're not able to kind of bump into people in the hall and figure out exactly what's going on. So being really crystal clear around what performance looks like for everyone in their roles is really important. Remote work does, you know, give people a lot more freedom and flexibility. but also it enables you to be very crisp and clear on the demands that you have on each of your team members and demand kind of the quality outcomes and productivity from that work. In terms then, the final area is that cultural integration. So thinking about how to build this unified company culture that bridges remote and in office. And if you've always only been in one country and you're thinking about bringing people in from another country, just remember, like, people come from everywhere, obviously, and they will bring their own wonderful cultures that will weave into what you have built in your own organization to date. I personally don't believe a company culture is static. I believe that it evolves and grows and changes as you add more people to the organization. And, you know, as your organization itself evolves in size and in challenges and strategy. So just thinking about that, being aware of how you will build that company culture is really important. How transparent will you be about work that's being done? Will you have open channels in Slack? Will you have open documentation and collaboration? Will you be encouraging offsites? If so, will that tally up with the amount of money that you will be able to budget for that? Will you fund virtual games nights? Just thinking about kind of things that you might do to really cement the cultural integration across oceans. And then moving on to the final phase, which is the implementation phase. So this is the one, getting the people in. How do you get them in? Whether we're using our PEO versus EOR, I'm going to talk about that as well. We believe at Remote that talent is everywhere and opportunity is not. And hiring remotely obviously significantly increases your talent pool. Remote itself receives 20,000 applications a month. So there is a huge opportunity there. On the candidate side, hiring remotely also levels the playing field and spreads opportunities all across the globe. And there's a lot of positives for the employer. And obviously some challenges are finding the best candidate amongst hundreds and thousands of applications that you may get. From an employer's perspective, getting access to really diverse talent pools and allowing you to build really culturally diverse teams, which fosters obviously creativity, innovation, and gives you a much broader understanding of global and local markets is a real plus for me. My belief is that if you're selling outside of the UK, your organization should reflect the markets that you sell into. And then in terms of like actually doing the hiring, making sure, my advice would be to make sure that you have a really structured hiring process that is very deliberate in applying the same selection criteria across all your candidates. So it's really important to check yourself on biases, make sure you're using competency-based hiring and assessing the cultural add that this candidate will bring. And then the second one then is around the Remote's jobs board. So we have a new job board called Remote Talent, which is built to revolutionize the job board space. So we're committed to making sure that we're connecting candidates with real opportunities, that we're increasing compensation transparency through that job board. And it's a really good resource to explore. We want the product to be very community driven, and I would encourage people to explore that and see if they want to use it, and do share your feedback on how it's going for you as well. It's a good resource with lots of people, lots of potential people for you.
All right, let me hop in with a few questions. So I think it's a genius idea, you know, with the talent board, you know, as Reid Hoffman said, first build a utility and then build a network. So first just solve some contract issues, kind of like SeedLegals, and then next leverage the network opportunity to see, you know, if people in Poland should be paid the same rates as London, or what is the going rate in Poland. So now a few questions for you. When you hire people remotely, it seems to me there are a few models you can use. One of them is you just find people and interview them in the same way you would as if they were, you know, here in London. And you're going to manage them directly. There's no one else involved. Of course, Remote's going to sort the contractual piece, but, you know, you're going to performance manage them and so on. Mm-hmm. Model number two is, it turns out you hire a bunch of people in, you know, Poland or wherever it might be hypothetically, and actually you now want to appoint somebody to manage, or you want to find somebody locally to do the sourcing of talent because they know the talent. And model three is, in a sense, it's outsourced, and you know, it's a project deliverable, not the people. Mm-hmm. What are you seeing people doing? Because it seems to me, you know, when people are local to your office, the management is easier, and understanding who to hire is easier. But when you've got somebody further away that you're not going to meet in person, Do you want to try and manage them remotely? What about time zone differences and so on? So let's talk firstly through what sort of remote setup do you see, or is everything just, back to the mothership and managed directly from the mothership?
It really depends on the size of those organizations, Anthony, and what they're putting in those countries. Like, for example, if you're just hiring, we're going to continue to use Poland. If you're just hiring 20 people in Poland across a number of different teams, you may consider still having your manager in your home base managing across. However, if you're going to put a sales hub there, you would move I would recommend having sales managers on the ground there as well. And I would actually recommend seeding them with the sales managers that are currently in seat in the UK. So they're actually bringing the culture from the company, the headquarter company, and building it in the other location before hiring in managers on the ground there.
That's a really great point, which is, the company culture, because it usually starts with the founders having a particular, culture, personality, whatever it might be. They bring in the first hires, and then you want to make sure that everyone shares the company tone of voice. And when everyone is in the office, so at least, meets each other, it sort of spreads organically, but that's harder. So I like the idea of, sending people abroad, and that's exactly what we did when we started our French and APAC offices. Is that some of the team members from sales or marketing moved there for a while so that the local team got up to speed faster. All right,
sorry, I was going to say we're super deliberate on the culture piece in remote because, like you say, there's no offices, so we can't just pick it up by osmosis in the office. So we're very deliberate on documentation about the culture, looms from our founders about the culture, and trying to provide as many kind of real life in role examples of what care looks like in a sales role versus a tech role.
All right. Now, quick question on time zones. How far is too far? So in your experience, when people are working together, hiring, is it like 2-hour time zone difference is okay, 4 hours is okay? Do you have any data to show what people are doing?
I don't have data that I can share offhand, Anthony, but I can tell you my own recommendations or experience, if that helps. I think it depends on the type of company you are. So if you are a company that is very deliberately asynchronous, like remote, the time zone shouldn't really matter. You should be able to have at least one kind of 30-minute meeting with that person in a given week. The time zones should connect enough to do that. And then a lot of the work should be asynchronous. However, if you are in more of like the last company I was in, it was definitely Zooms all day long, very heavily focused on meetings, decisions being made in meetings. And as a result of that, you may try and have kind of somebody within your 4 to 5 hour time zone, because you want to have at least kind of half a day-ish with those individuals to try and push things forward. But it really depends on the mindset and the working.
Okay. All right. So at some point it crosses over from, in the same way, we're all in the office to, well, we could plausibly be in the office to, we're all actually on London time zone, but some people are further afield, through to, we're just a completely decentralized company and there are people sending and receiving emails and slacking at all hours of the day.
Exactly.
And there's no particular on or off time. And we all need to adjust our lives to be able to switch off when we need to.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. Cool. Okay. Back to you.
Okay. Okay, where was I? So legal and HR frameworks. I did speak a bit about the complexity and the intricacies to be aware of depending on where you're hiring. And I do want to reinforce that you do need to be really careful in this space. Remote offers very specific support across all different countries in terms of legal and compliance, intelligence and support. And just know that we enable companies to do this compliantly and manage and hire the employees and contractors in loads of various ways, and use our products in various ways. You don't have to use it for one thing and then everything else. You can actually choose what you want to engage in. So we have payroll, we have global payroll, but we also have domestic payroll, contractor management, employers of record. So a lot of different products, a HRIS, remote talent platform. So all of those things that you can choose, and remote will support you. We have a huge network of people internally here. I just want to touch on PEOs versus EORs. Now, this one always used to confuse me transparently before I came here to remote. So the way I think about them is that the PEO is the professional employer organization, and basically, if you have an entity in the country that you're hiring into, it's better you can use a PEO. They would be an external company that can provide services like payroll, benefits, tax compliance for the employees and the contractors in that country. However, if you're expanding abroad and you don't want to establish an entity in the other country, you can't work with a PEO. The co-employment relationship of a PEO does require the local entity on the company's part. Entities do take a while, or can take a while, to set up. They can be expensive, and depending on the expertise of your in-house team setting it up, it could take anything from 3 to 6 months. So in situations like this where you are not developing or creating another entity in the country, an EOR, or employer of record, is the ideal alternative there. And I think one final thing on kind of legal risk, I guess, is on employee misclassification. So it's really important to also classify your employees correctly. Depending on what countries you're hiring in, there's different requirements, but we are looking at exempt versus non-exempt employees, salaried versus hourly, contractor versus employee. And if there's a risk that if they are misclassified, that you would be fined in your given country. We have a free misclassification risk tool that I believe we're actually going to share post this event. Even if you do nothing and don't use us for anything, I would really encourage you to check your own risk for your own benefit.
Quickly, I'll hop in there. So I do webinars with Daniel Glazer from Wilson Sonsini. He's a lawyer at the biggest, VC law firm in the US. And he talks about UK companies expanding to the US. And one of the key things he says is never employ anyone in the US from your UK company, because you'll create an employee relationship and a tax relationship with the US. And if they feel that they are aggrieved, they may try and sue, which then creates a US presence, and it's a disaster. So, the last piece of advice you said, which is the PEO, which creates a local presence, in some cases, that's just fine, right? We've got a subsidiary in France. We know we've got a team of 10 in France. We're in France. But in other cases, you don't want to have a presence in a country, in which case that tool that you've described sounds like the way to check that, if you are doing it through an employee of record, then, it's remote. That is the employer, not the company. I'm not saying that this is correct, but my understanding, and therefore the company doesn't have a presence in that country for tax or other reasons. So definitely something to check, because the first time you establish that connection with another country, you may now have established a tax relationship and other things that either you did or you definitely didn't want.
Yeah, that's correct. And remote is the employer, to your example there, Anthony.
Right.
Okay, so will I keep going? Yeah, okay, great. So we have, next slide just talks about some specific questions that Anthony got in or suggested that we dive into. So the first one was, at what point should a company consider changing employment status for employees that want to relocate? Now, there's a lot of legal frameworks and policies for managing employee relocations. Obviously, there's benefits. We have flexibility. It's retention. The employee would be more likely to stay with you. Time zone coverage can be quite beneficial, but there's also drawbacks. Higher costs potentially, exposure to risk if legal and regulatory and employee complexities and regulations in other countries. And then time zone coverage could be a positive, but it could also be a challenge. So my advice in this is just thinking very carefully about changing the employment status for employees that want to relocate. Sometimes the relocation could potentially affect the company's legal and tax obligations. So that could be when an employee moves to a different country with different employment laws and tax regulations. So it's really crucial to consult with a legal or a HR professional to really understand the implications of these moves and to ensure compliance with all relevant laws and regulations. I would personally try to ensure a probation period is reinstated in the relocation, particularly if the country itself is kind of a notoriously tricky country from an employer perspective, i.e. it's very employee friendly.
Or if they've got terrible Wi-Fi and everything falls apart. So what you've raised is a really great point, because at SeedLegals, we obviously, we're at least hybrid. And I started seeing people on my Zoom calls with palm trees in the background. I'm going, that is not Kensington. Where are you? And so people have just decided, well, if I'm working, online, I may as well be somewhere sunny. So we put in place a sort of remote working policy so that if you plan to be outside of the UK for more than 30 days at a time or more than so many months in a year, you have to get approval from your manager, because otherwise, exactly as you said, you start finding that the person is classified as an employee in some other country and subject to local employment law, and you didn't factor that in.
Yeah.
The other thing to note is that as soon as at some point, if they're living abroad, it makes no sense to pay national insurance and PAYE, the UK tax, if they're not getting the benefit of it. But as soon as they stop being an employee, they will lose their EMI share options. So it's a really important thing to understand at what point the person is just, happening to be in Ibiza for a few weeks and coming back versus what point they've moved and you're now switching them from employee in the UK to either contractor or using remote in an EOR and so on to continue as a different, employee through remote. And then we'll talk about a bit later what happens with their share options.
Yes. And in my last company, we kind of had a 90-day rule of thumb. Like if you're going to be out 90 days, the company itself could be subject to some additional tax as well that we need to be aware of. So it's super important to know where your people are and how long they're going to stay there if they are not in the country that they're contracted to.
All right. Back to you.
Thank you. Okay. So moving on, talking about equity, we can do payroll instead. Equity. Okay. So talking about equity, how we can offer equity to remote teams, specifically in multiple countries. Now, there is no, and I realize that all the answers I'm probably going to give today are coached in. There's no yes or no or straight black and white answer. And essentially, there's a lot of legal considerations to be aware of when you're offering equity across different jurisdictions. Remote does make this easy for many companies, but equity laws are tricky, and the understanding of stock options aren't always common knowledge, even in countries where employees often get equity. So when granting stock options to foreign employees, it's crucial to understand the tax withholding and the reporting requirements for each country. Consider any tax advantage schemes for the employees and understand the company's tax reporting obligations. You must either open a foreign subsidiary or work with an employer of record to employ people in other countries. And understanding local labour laws is really critical in those countries. And your strategy should always ensure compliance while still offering foreign employees the equity they desire. Startups may also consider remote partners. Like there's two companies that I would like to call out called Cake and ESOP, EASOP, and they specialize in global equity and can help make navigating the intricacies country by country a lot simpler. So next question, please, Emily. Payroll. Okay. So we use several factors when we make any compensation decision. We consider cost of labor, alignment to industry benchmarks, using reliable market data. We use Radford, the level of experience and alignment to the position. And as a company, we aim to position ourselves at the 65th percentile within the overall market. And therefore, we look at data at the percentile in the market. We are very open and transparent with our organization that we pay at the 65th percentile. And I think the transparency around payroll is something that is really one of our levers to build trust in how we reward and recognize our team members. We have geo ranges at Remote, and what we think of as, I guess how I'd explain them in simple terms, is basically the people in different locations get paid different amounts for doing the same job. And this is because the cost of labor and market rates can really vary from place to place. So if you work in a location where there's a much higher labor cost, you might get paid more than someone located in a country that has a much lower cost of labor. So like put really simply, if somebody works in the Netherlands, potentially they would be paid at about 80% of what a person in the US doing the same job would make. Each country falls into its own geo range, which means that even if two countries are in the same range, they might have very different pay ranges. And we use Radford to determine our pay bands.
Have you got info on that available publicly? Have you got any short, snippets of that here to see, if you're hiring people outside the UK, what your likely savings might be?
So on our remote jobs board, we have bands of salaries. So you could look there to see similar jobs. You could look there to find them on the remote jobs board and it would give the comp for other countries. I think we do have a compensation calculator tool. I don't have the exact link for it. Maybe Emily could share it, but we do have a compensation calculator tool for our customers.
All right, brilliant.
Okay. Next slide. So to think about hiring employees as contractors versus directly hiring. So thinking about how you would, I guess, evaluate the value of contractors in-house. For a business, ultimately, this depends on the needs of your business. I would see the use of contractors for more short-term projects. There's an immediate business need that they need to solve. Somebody's gone out on leave potentially, or the business can't afford to have that skill set in-house on a long-term basis. Even a consultant coming in, doing a deep dive into something within the company, giving a range of suggestions and then exiting. Direct hires offer, more stability and commitment on both sides, from the employee and the employer perspective. It does fulfill a permanent need that's crucial to the business, and you want someone to be really committed to the company's long-term success and to feel that the company is committed and invested in them as well. So the benefits really for the direct hires, as you can see here, would be around retention, the commitment, low risk of misclassification, thus low risk of fines, and having an opportunity to find best global talent. The majority of people are probably more likely to apply for direct jobs than contractors. In terms of drawbacks, there's obviously a much higher financial investment as you think of the total employee cost, and there's also the complexity of local employment laws. Keep in mind that opening an entity also means maintaining an entity and potentially closing it. So if you're not planning on having employees in an area for a very long time, it would make more sense to use an EOR and potentially contractor them into that EOR.
So thank you for that. One of the challenges is employment law in different countries. So there's a spectrum. On the one end, there's the US, which is, hello, you're fired. Thank you for coming. And that's it. On the other hand, there are countries like, as I understand, Holland, where after you've been with the company for 2 years, it's almost impossible to fire you. And I think Germany as well. And the UK, I think, sits fairly happily in the middle. You can't go, you're fired. Yeah. There's a certain number of weeks per year you build up of notice period and so on. And I think that leads to the right behaviors. The problem is, as soon as you start hiring people as employees in other countries, if you are creating it in a way you can't fire them if it's not working out, that's a serious problem. So I think it's really important to look at the employment laws. And, if you think of the world as a global stage now, countries have to be competitive on their employment laws, both for people locally and for people working globally. So, if you can hire somebody in a country that if it's not working or the project ends or you don't need their design expertise anymore, you can terminate on 30 days notice. First one where you just can't get rid of them ever, then you know where you're going to hire people from. So that's an important one, I think, that people should keep in mind.
Yes, and if you're able to have probation periods, I think I would highly encourage you to have as lengthy as you can in your contracts, depending on what country you're hiring into.
That's a good point. Okay.
Next slide, please. Okay, so really I just want to talk a bit about basically how to think about what parts of your team make sense to be remote or not. And I did touch on this earlier, but again, it's very specific to your company and for what you want. So for us, we believe that anyone can be remote, i.e. not in office, but obviously that may not always be the case. And even if we have to have people in specific areas for legal or government relation reasons, like maybe somebody who's working in policy and you want them in Brussels, think about whether they need to be in an office or not, or if you can do hybrid. Remote, as I said, researched the top roles in the UK in 2022 that had the most remote opportunities, and they were in the areas of software development and customer support and marketing. So we are here to support anything you need really across the board. And if you have any more questions, I think we can dive. Anthony, are you getting questions on your side?
There are a few questions in the chat. So let's go to one which says, on the EOR side, what is the typical commission or cost that you'd expect to pay for that? So that's obviously a key factor for people deciding which way to go.
Yes. I do not have that answer, actually. You must have it. I don't deal in the sales side of it. I just know what I know. We will put it into this chat box in a few minutes.
All right. Okay. So then there's a question, and the answer might be Slack, it might be obvious, but what are the most effective communication and collaboration tools? So obviously there's the water cooler moment. I must say, when COVID hit and the SeedLegals team couldn't be in the office anymore, nobody skipped a beat. We're all on Trello, Zoom, Slack,
Yeah.
and it didn't seem to make much difference. I thought that the onboarding would be much more difficult with the company culture and so on, and the water cooler moment. I think it might have been a bit more, but I'm not sure it was dramatically more. And I must say, when there's now someone suggests an in-office meeting, I say, actually, I much prefer screen sharing on Zoom than trying to plug into the monitor and get the computer to output on HDMI and all the other things that never work correctly. And then there's someone calling in on phone. But in your experience, do you have any info on what might be the best collaboration things that you're seeing, and what does Remote use?
Yes, we use Slack. Basically, everything is on Slack. Like, even in my first week, I was refreshing my email. I was so used to everything being on email, nothing was coming in. Everything is on Slack. We also use Notion to document, very good decisions that are being made, and that's a real collaborative document as well. We use Loom a lot to do videos and share kind of updates. We use Google Meet. We also have we have kind of Slack bots, I guess, or little nudges that might go into our team channel saying, oh, it's Wednesday, share what you've been up to this week. Or, we have nudges, I guess, to keep people sharing and to keep sometimes, a light, to add a bit of lighter levity into the team channel, as opposed to it just being work, 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 work. So we have included some of those Slack bots, which are very good. And then we try and do virtual meetups. We allow a budget for meetups in country. So some people, and they're fun related, like not necessarily work related. And we encourage those on an ongoing basis as well. But it's about kind of having a bit of fun, because there is the risk that if you are not in an office, you're going to miss out on the chat, I guess. And the chat is very motivating for a lot of people. So making sure that you're finding ways to weave that into the day-to-day in terms of your tech stack and how you're engaging with your employee base is really important.
Okay, two things there. One, we've tried and it's sort of fallen into disuse, but you can try a Slack add-in called Donut, which schedules virtual coffees between people and matches you, which is fun. And then Loom is, I think, the one that probably few people are using, and I use it extensively. It's just so fast to give feedback on a design or a problem or some idea. You just record a video, do a screen share, and wham, you've got it. And I must say, it's the preferred way of communicating, ideas and so on, which can be viewed asynchronously. And for people who don't talk as fast as me, you can turn it up to 1.2 speed and get through it faster. All right. So now we've got a question about slightly off piece, which is about foreign directors and shareholders into a UK company. And the answer is the wonderful thing about English law is that it doesn't matter where the director is, and it doesn't matter where the shareholder is. They can be anywhere. The one thing to be a bit careful of is if you've got major shareholders or directors that are not in the UK, you might find you have more problems with your bank, with the bank account. So the bank does KYC, and it's a complete nuisance. So at SeedLegals, we've got Index Ventures as an investor, and their nominee is based in Jersey. So we couldn't get a bank account with Tide, because what do you know? Tide says you've got a shareholder with 15% shareholding or something that's not in the UK. Sorry, we can't help you. It's like, okay, whatever. But from the company side, company law, there's no problem. From the banks, you might have a bit of a pain. All right. So any questions, Emily?
I'm just dropping in some resources into the chat and then also taking notes of people asking questions live. Did we get through? I think Rachel asked a question about a shift from Asia to Europe and Africa. Maybe you want to run through that if you have any thoughts, Barbara. It says, there seems to be a shift from Asia to Europe and Africa. Have you noticed this at Remote? Is Africa becoming more of an interest for companies to hire from?
Yeah, so specifically with remote, we are a global company, but the majority, I think, are probably our biggest market is Europe and Africa, versus Asia. So Asia for us is very much a growing market. So I have noticed a big shift into Africa. I'm not sure why exactly, but we are just seeing it from a behavior perspective. Similar working hours, I guess, potentially a lower geo pay range. I'm not sure. Some countries are more employer friendly, some are not. It really depends on the location that you're hiring into.
Okay, and I think as more people are studying at uni and the broadband adoption rises, I think there's a
Yeah.
great, fantastic workforce in Africa just waiting to be tapped. And I'm an ex-South African, and I see lots of South Africans and Johannesburg and Cape Town and elsewhere. So that could be really interesting. So now a couple of interesting technical questions, which is. The risk of recharacterization of somebody who might have been a 0-hour contract in the UK but based abroad, the local laws changing that. Any thoughts on that?
No, I would just make sure that you're compliant, digging into misclassification, making sure you're focusing on that. And if you move somebody from a 0-hour contract to the UK and then you put them somewhere else, just making sure that they have a local contract that aligns with the role that they do.
All right. So next question: person moves abroad. At what point does national insurance, stop? I guess it's when they stop being an employee. And is that right?
And that would be my assumption as well. If they move to another country, you would start them, I would assume, on a new contract in the new entity, and thus you would start paying whatever local requirements.
All right. Then there's a great question, which is a question for SeedLegals. When are you going to integrate with remote API? Good point. I hadn't thought of that. That might be exactly what I need to do. All right. All right. So
I got to pay a little commission to Hale there. Thank you very much.
All right. So I think, to me, one of the key questions which we have here, which is, realistically, so this is all great. When would you hire somebody as a contractor and when would you hire as an employee? And, for people, let's say, in the UK, it's clear an employee is when you want somebody to be with the company long term, and a contractor is when either you just can't find an employee because you're competing with banks and all they're paying contractor rates, or you really think about it as a short-term piece. I must say my advice is I basically refuse to pay and hire contractors. I think it's like hooked on drugs, which is, it'll get you high and then it'll kill you, which is if you're hiring contractors, you're just going to be hemorrhaging money and paying way more than you would as an employee. It's easy and it's tempting to do, but you have to try hard to not do it. And at SeedLegals, I just refuse to hire people as contractors because you're always thinking, oh, I need to hire someone desperately. I'm going to hire a contractor. And then they're with you 2 years later, you're paying 50% more than you would as an employee. They're not really integrating with the rest of the company because everyone else is an employee and thinks it's temporary, but it's not. So I'm really not a fan of contractors. But of course, this is if it's local, if it's remote, then the formula is different because the employment laws are different, and it may be much more efficient to hire the person as a contractor just because you don't want to create an employment relationship in another country. Have you got any thoughts from that on, you're hiring someone elsewhere, contractor versus employee, and what are you seeing?
Yeah, so I don't think about the location. I more so think about the job that needs to get done. So, for example, we have a number of fixed-term contractors in our recruiting organization because we have ramped up recruiting for the first half of this year, and we are really focused on growing quite fast. So, that is why we've gotten people in for fixed term. We don't want to end up in a place where we are, 2 years down the line and we have to do layoffs. That's not something we want to do. We want to focus on filling whatever the immediate need is. Generally, though, we would default to hiring employees that we know are filling what I would think of as a permanent role within an organization.
All right. And then I think last question, thank you, which is, does the EOR charge VAT on the payments they receive or we bill from another overseas country? And is there VAT?
I believe there is, but I don't have the exact number for you. But I will find out, Anthony, and come back to you. So there's two
All
things
right.
I believe.
Oh, okay, excellent. So for everyone watching, the recording will be available. Barbara, any words to wrap up on your side?
I think just know that there's a ton of opportunity beyond the UK, and I would really encourage you all to engage as much as possible. There's a huge amount of support and infrastructure that is there to help make it as easy as possible and seamless and compliant for your companies to really engage in hiring outside of the UK. And we are here to help you and delighted to help as much as we can.
All right. Well, fantastic. And for me, it's been a slightly, I have to say, a journey, which is once upon a time, as in before COVID, my goal was only to hire people who would be in the office every day. And then COVID hit and no one was in the office and nobody missed a beat. And I live an embarrassingly short 12 minutes run from the office and I'm almost never in the office. So now I look to hire plausibly, largely people who could be in the office, a day or two a week. But the question is it time to take the next big step and go, actually, it doesn't really matter where you are at all, and switch to that fully decentralized. And I'm exploring that potentially as more and more of my team I find on a call with palm trees in the background. So I'll certainly be exploring remotes more and maybe do that API integration to make it even easier for everybody. All right. Thank you so much, Barbara and Emily. Thanks all for watching. Any questions, reach out for me, Anthony at SeedLegals.com or Anthony Rose on LinkedIn. And Barbara, how to reach you?
At remote.com.
All right. Fantastic. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Team.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.